Our sense of touch is a part of the somatosensory system. The somatosensory system is a complete system of sensory neurons and neural pathways that respond to changes at the surface or inside the body. Nerve endings are located all over our body. We have four basic sensory receptors. First of all, temperature receptors. These are called thermoreceptors, and they identify warm and cold. These are found in the dermis layer of the skin. Cold receptors are located deeper than the warm receptors. We also have more cold receptors than we do warm. Our sense of pressure, those receptors are called mechanoreceptors. These are located deeper in the dermis. We have roughly 500,000 mechanoreceptors throughout the body. Our pain receptors are called nociceptors. We have more of these than any other receptor. We have roughly 5 million. These are located near the surface of the skin, so we can easily be detected or alerted of any potential injury or danger or pain. Nerve endings are unevenly distributed throughout the body. Some areas have a higher concentration, and therefore we are more sensitive in those areas. Not surprisingly, the lips have a very high concentration of nerve endings. That's why we kiss with our lips. Our lips are more sensitive. Thermoreceptors are in higher concentrations in certain body parts like your hands and your feet, as opposed to, let's say, your thighs. So your hands and your feet are more likely to get cold or hot before other parts of your body. Our pain receptors are also unevenly distributed. Some areas of our body also have more pain and pressure receptors than others. Our sense of touch, pain, pressure, and temperature will vary from person to person. It's due to our brain's interpretation of what we are experiencing. Some people have a higher pain tolerance, and some people have a higher tolerance for temperature as well, because the processing of our sensory neurons are taking place in the brain. That is your perception of those sensory inputs. So, like I said, it will vary from person to person. One theory on how we experience pain is called the gate control theory. So we have a channel or a gate that's usually closed in the spine. When small nerve fibers are stimulated, so let's say you cut your finger, you have a paper cut. So those small nerve fibers are stimulated, opening up that channel or that gate, transmitting that impulse to the brain, and we feel pain. When larger fibers are stimulated, that gate will close. So if you've ever had like a paper cut or a small cut on your hand, and you start to rub your hand or the area around it, that is going to actually stimulate larger nerve fibers and help alleviate that pain and close that gate. Our sensory impulses for temperature, pressure, and pain are sent to the sensory cortex for processing. This is where we interpret those impulses. So a lot of times people who have a limb removed due to amputation from injury, they still experience a sensation in that limb. Even though the limb is gone, the sensory cortex associated with that limb is still very active. So after an amputation, a person may wake up in the morning and they can still sense that their leg is there, so they attempt to get out of bed and may fall. This is known as phantom limb. Our sense of taste is called gustation. We have taste buds called papillae or papillae on the tongue. The food that we eat is broken down by saliva. Then the chemicals from the food are absorbed into our taste buds. We have those little hair-like projections called cilia, similar to those that are in the inner ear, also located inside of our taste buds. This is where transduction occurs, converting those chemicals to a neural impulse, which will be sent to the frontal lobe for processing and interpretation. You've learned that nerve cells do not regenerate, but your sense of taste is the exception. The cilia in the tongue regenerate every 1 to 2 weeks. That is a good thing. It would be terrible if you damaged those taste buds from eating hot wings and were never able to taste again. You have 5 different taste sensations. 4 of them you probably learned as a young child: sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. There's also a 5th taste sensation called umami, which is a savory meat sensation. Sensory interaction involves one sense influencing or interacting with another. A good example is our sense of taste and smell. Our sense of smell has a direct impact on our sense of taste. If you've ever had a stuffy nose, you've experienced this. It is difficult to taste food if your sense of smell is impaired. Or you may have held your nose as a child in order to eat a food you didn't really care for. Our sense of smell is called olfaction. As molecules travel through the air, they are collected by the nose. Cilia, or small hair-like receptors, are located on the upper part of the nasal passage. It is here where transduction takes place. The molecules are converted to a neural impulse and sent to the brain by the olfactory nerve. Those impulses will be processed in various locations throughout the brain, including the temporal lobe, sensory cortex, and limbic system. Remember, this is the one sensory impulse that will bypass the thalamus and travel directly to the brain for processing. Along with vision, hearing, tasting, smelling, and touch, we have 2 more senses. The first is the vestibular sense. This is our sense of balance, orienting our body position in space. This is regulated by the semicircular canals, which are 3 fluid-filled tubes which sit atop of the inner ear. When your head moves, the liquid in the canal slosh around and move across the hairs or cilia. This in turn sends impulses to the cerebellum to help us maintain our balance. If you spin around vigorously, the fluid may become all out of whack, and you will feel dizzy and off balance until that fluid returns to normal. And finally, our kinesthetic sense tells us where our body parts are, where our limbs are, without having to look at them. So you can raise your hand and put your arm in the air, and you understand and recognize that your arm is up over your head. We have little receptors that are in our muscles in our joints, called proprioceptors, that communicate information from our limbs to our brain. If your proprioceptors were damaged and you lost the ability to recognize where your limbs were located in space, you would have to actually look at them in order to make them move. We take for granted that we can walk across the room without looking at our feet, because those receptors are communicating with our brains. If they were damaged, you would have to watch your feet in order to just walk across the room.